Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Alive Symposium. These are conversations that we need to have. I've had them in my family, we've had them in our communities, and so I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here and privileged to have this panel to talk to. So what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves for about a minute, tell us who you are, and a little bit about your perspective, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. And then audience, think about questions you might have, because at the end of this, we'll be asking you to ask your questions. So let's begin.
I'm the Reverend Gail Seavey. I'm the lead minister at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. I've been there for 14 years. And we are a non-creedal faith. We're very Protestant in that we believe people have a direct line to whatever is greater than themselves, and that we freely gather in community. So we minister to a great variety of points of view about dying.
Thank you.
My name is Flip. It's a nickname for Philip Rice, and I'm one of the rabbis at Congregation Micah. We are blessed to have leaders in our community like Anna Jean O'Neill and her husband Scott. My wife and I share the pulpit there. We've been there for 13 years. We're very, we like to say, all-inclusive, everybody-friendly kind of community, largely interfaith. We try to be out front on a lot of liberal issues. There are 5 synagogues in town. They represent different, like you would say, denominations, but really movements within Judaism. And our community sees sacred text as sort of divinely inspired. So it gets more of a vote than a veto in how we live our lives.
Thank you.
My name is Kelly Miller Smith Jr., and I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church Capitol Hill here in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been there for 8 years, even though it is also the congregation in which I grew up. My father had served as pastor there for some 33 years. There were 3 pastors between him and me, and I actually grew up in this community where we are right now. Literally, I'm within a stone's throw of where we are right now. Our congregations are part of several different denominations, but it's interesting that even though we are part of denominations, the one that we ascribe to mostly does not necessarily address the kind of issues that we need to be talking about today.
Thank you.
My name is Father John Raphael. I am the priest chaplain, staff chaplain at St. Thomas West Hospital. I've been in that role since 2012. I also serve on our ethics committee and am a bedside consultant. I have to say this, in my prior assignment, I was a high school principal in New Orleans at St. Augustine High School. And for one semester, after Hurricane Katrina, we merged with 2 girls' schools. Where are you, my dear? Stand up. I just met one of our former students is here today. She works at Vanderbilt, and she went to our merged school. She may have stepped out of the room. So anyway, very happy to be here to share from a Catholic perspective as well as from a hospital perspective thoughts on these issues.
So the organizers have decided not to start with an easy question. We're going to ask you about the meaning of life. And in terms of the central beliefs of your faith, talk a little bit about what life means. And if we could start with Father and then come all the way down.
The meaning of life. Wow. So, I mean, for us, I think the first word that comes to mind is gift. That life is gift. It is a gift that is given to us by God, and through that gift of life, we participate fully in the life of God. We participate in the goodness of God. We participate in all of the wonderful things that God has created, brought into existence, given to us for our use, and because of our unique capacity as intelligent and free creatures, that gift entails responsibilities. Yes, we rejoice, we receive, and we rejoice and share, but we also have responsibilities toward the things we've been given, toward the other people who have also been given that gift of life, and that ultimately this gift is not static, it's a journey that begins in this infinite goodness and mystery, who is God, and a journey that ultimately ends in this same mystery. But that stuff that takes place in between is absolutely critical.
Thank you. I could almost just say ditto and test the mic. But even expanding on that just a tad, we look at it not only as a gift, but also in terms of something to receive, something to have, but also something to share. And there's something that's in all of that that is reciprocal. So therefore, it's not just I'm living for myself, but also live and share in context with others as well.
So one of the things I love about being a rabbi in Music City is they put a microphone in front of me and they pay me to sing because I'm not good at it. But there's this little short chant that I'm going to do for you, which I believe will answer this question, at least from the Jewish perspective, and it goes like this. אלו דברים שאין לכם שיעור, שאדם אוכל פירותיכם בעולם הזה, והקרן קיימת לו לעולם הבא, ואלו כן, כיבוד אב ואם וגמילות חסדים, והשכמת בית המדרש שחרית וערבית, והכנסת אורחים וביקור קולים, והכנסת כלה ולוויית המת ועיון תפילה, והבאת שלום בין אדם לחברו, ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם. No, I'm just kidding. So, in English it means these are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys in the fruit of this world, but the principle really remains in the world to come, and they are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study, morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, making peace among people. And the study of Torah, it encompasses them all. And I share this with you because Jewish people are supposed to do these things. And by doing these things, we believe the world will not only be a better place, but you will find meaning and be a better person. Because when I go to visit someone in the hospital, I'm very conscious that I'm not in the hospital. And if I go to Children's Hospital, I hug my kids differently definitely that night. So by doing these things, they create a self-reflective experience where we both help other people, but really improve our own character and find meaning.
Because we are non-creedal, we agree with what everybody said, except we don't always use the word God. We try to open up this understanding because we believe the human spirit is connected to all the things I spoke about, whether you have a particular belief or not. So how we speak about it is we're part of the interconnected web of existence. And so those, that relationship with each other in love and what we call love in public justice is how we live our lives. And that gives meaning to it.
So we talked about how we talk about it, but let's talk about how we do it. So let's talk about rituals. What are some of the rituals that you perform to be able to discuss these things, to manifest these things? And who would like to start?
So every year, we have several rituals to remember those in the community have passed away. Of course, memorial services and funerals are high holy days, always. It's a ritual of celebrating, remembering a life, and community coming together to repair the hole that they feel has been lost. And then every year at our annual homecoming, we go out, we gather water, everybody brings water and mingles it together, and Unitarian churches do this all over the country. And then we go out, we have a columbarium, we have a place where people who choose to be a part of the community after death have their ashes interred, and we go out and we remember them, we read all their names, and we pour the water upon them, kind of honoring that they're a part of our community still. And then, we're just talking to several other people here in the audience, we every year on the first Sunday in November, so we just celebrated this, we celebrate All Saints Day. The Universalist part of my tradition, that was a big holiday for them because they believed that all souls were saints. They believed, and we still do believe, that love never dies, and everyone returns to the embrace of love, however they see that. So we do both the remembrance of everyone who died in our community that year, talk a little about them. Somebody here was just telling me about a memorial service. They were there this year, and we were remembering that person that we dearly loved together. And then everybody has a chance, they all light candles to remember the dead.
Thank you.
Sometimes I see my job less as sort of the rabbinic authority than the spiritual director. And the reason for that is because different patients, different families, they observe different rituals. And rituals have different powers. And there's a custom in Judaism that recognizes custom as in terms of the power of law. And I'm going to try and illustrate this for you. There are superstitions. And so when taking care of people, I would defer sometimes to their superstitions. And by that I mean, it's a Jewish tradition, I don't want to call it a superstition, that for the soul, which is separate from the body, to get out of the room might need the window open. That's not the Jewish law. But if that's how they do it in Nashville, Tennessee, and they don't necessarily, if that's how that family does it, then that's how it should be done. So I would recommend showing as much respect to the wishes of the patient and the family, who may or may not be familiar with a variety of the rituals, which is when the spiritual director / rabbi comes in sometimes to express what some of these rituals are. It's a mitzvah, it's a commandment. That's what I sort of chanted for you, these deeds that we engage in to visit people who are sick. So if you're caring for someone, there's a good chance that that person will have visitors. By the same token, that person may be vain and may not want visitors. That doesn't make them not Jewish. We do see, as I said, the body as a host for the soul. It therefore belongs to God and should be treated with respect, just like the body and soul should both be treated that way. Finally, when rabbis come to visit patients, sometimes they'll engage in what's called vidui, in confession, and they'll pray with them. It's not Jewish tradition to hasten death. Before death, someone may fall into a specific Jewish category called gosis, and during this, it's believed that no action really should be taken to hasten or to delay the death. But we do have a variety of rituals, both leading up to and certainly after the person has passed away. And there are experts in Nashville that are happy to help with anybody going through that procedure. Our community, like a lot of Jews in the world, see these rituals as bringing a greater meaning and fulfillment to our lives. And we, like I stated before with sacred text, try to incorporate those rituals which we find most meaningful. Therefore, there's no one exact authority. And often in Judaism, we do what's called preserve the dissenting opinion. So don't be frustrated if some family wants this or some family wants that, and it's not completely consistent.
Thank you.
That's fairly consistent even with Protestant Christian tradition, and that is that there are so many different people that have so many different perspectives on so many different things as pertains to the continuum of life, what happens at the end of life, and what happens moving beyond death in and of itself. And within our own congregation, we, at least as I serve as pastor, is to try to find what stream, what direction the family is trying to go, and try to help them not just to do and to be what it is they perceive, but also give them that spiritual understanding. Oftentimes, I've had to tell families, all right, this is what is more consistent with our tradition, this is what we believe. However, if this helps you, if this works for you, then we try to modify it in such a way so that it is consistent with what helps you. We try also to make sure that it does not cross too many barriers in terms of what's going to help them even beyond a person's protracted illness or even their death. So how can we help them even beyond that? Because sometimes, for instance, several years ago, I had a situation where a woman's son, 16-year-old son, was killed tragically in an automobile accident. We're talking about over 20 some odd years ago. And but she struggled with that whole process of being killed in an accident, even to this day. That was in the 80s, and we're talking about in the year 2018, that she still struggles with the fact that her son was killed in the accident. And the challenge that I began to realize from that situation is that there's some things we need to do even on the front end that's going to help them as they move forward. But otherwise, they don't move forward.
Thank you.
So I'm glad that the first question was about life, and as I prepared to answer the second one, so there's a gospel text that stands out from the Catholic perspective that I think is critical to this, and it's when Jesus says, I've come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. So in our tradition, and what we find, we use this concept of unity and diversity, and that there is a fundamental unity. And key to ritualizing that entire gift of life is the sacramental system, which literally we come into the world naturally through birth, and for many, a few days afterwards, through baptism, and all of the 7 sacraments which accompany us with that more abundant life, that not only our natural life, but that share in what we would call the supernatural life through the sacraments. But those sacraments are often frequently overlaid with many customs, many traditions, etc. So the diversity in the midst of that unity, that fundamental sacramental unity, is still found. So that some ethnic groups may celebrate it differently, do it a little differently, but those accompaniments, those sacramental ritual accompaniments, follow that person through life. When we come to the end of life, then we have, for instance, the sacrament of the anointing of the sick, which some of the older Catholics would understand it as extreme unction, because prior to the Second Vatican Council, it was really reserved almost to the very end of life. Now we recognize a restoration of its original. It's a healing sacrament. But when physical healing and medical healing is no longer an option, it remains a spiritual healing and an accompaniment. And those sacraments can be united because we have the Eucharist, our regular ritual celebration of communion of the body and blood of Christ. But at the end of that, we have a form of it called viaticum, which is food for the journey from time into eternity. And same with the sacrament of reconciliation, confession. We have the way we celebrate it throughout our lives, but there is the special, what we call the apostolic pardon, which is given at the end of life, in danger of death. And then when a person is actually in the process of actively dying, our commendation for that, and I say it has an accordion effect. It depends on how maximalist or minimalist the family or the patient is. I mean, some want A to Z. They want litanies and prayers and sprinklings and all. Some need simply the basics, just enough to speak to the moment. So it gives us, as the ritual celebrants, the flexibility to draw from this tradition which unites us around the globe, but to apply it in ways that meet the specific needs of this patient and their family.
Let's go a little deeper into this subject. When you're using these rituals, how do you address fear of dying and death? How do you address the pain of mourning, both for your patient, your congregant, and also for the families? Perhaps, Father, we can start with you.
So I think this is really, really important, because there's no right way or wrong way to engage these things. So from a theological perspective, I think from a Catholic perspective, we look at 2 aspects of death. I mean, there is that strong tradition, okay, death as a consequence of sin, whether it be the sin of Adam and Eve, however one experiences it. That aspect of it helps us to understand death as a violator, death as a disruptor, death as a destroyer. And from that perspective, we help people, give them permission to experience the horror of death, the tragedy of death, the pain of death as it comes to them, and to know that that is okay, that is a reasonable, rational, responsible response to something that is coming into your life, if you are the subject of it, a person dying, or a family member. Then on the other side, and again from our perspective, Jesus was at the center of it, who entered into this experience of ours, bringing the divine into the human in a specific way, and enduring death, and in our belief in the resurrection, therefore conquering it, transforming it, giving it a new meaning, and transforming it from an end, absolute finality, to a passageway into something that is radically more beautiful and radically more powerful. So holding those two elements in tension, which means people will vacillate, and that's okay. We can vacillate from the fear and from fear to hope, from sorrow to joy. So our role, it seems to me, is to help people to live in that tension, to voice it, to express it, and to know that there's an abiding sense for hope in the midst of all of it. And if we can help them to cling to the hope as they experience the passage or accompany their loved ones, I think would be at least helpful to them on that journey.
Thank you.
I think part of the challenge is not to be dishonest about the whole process of dying and of death. And sometimes we have a very dishonest response. And in that dishonesty, it gives people unrealistic and dishonest kind of help and support. It doesn't help them through the process. It's part of what we have to do. The other thing is try not to answer all the questions. Sometimes, we again, because everybody's situation is different, everybody's journey in terms of their faith and their relationship with God is different. And many times I just have to tell folks, I just don't know why. I don't know why this happened. I don't know why this is a situation. Why is it that your baby is sick? Why is it your baby passes? Why is it that people are taken suddenly? Why is it they have these protracted illnesses and things like that? And so I find myself oftentimes just sitting with people and letting them share their anguish and sharing what it is that they're dealing with and what they're going through. And through that sitting there, sometimes in what they say, it gives them an angle, not only in terms of bringing comfort or at least some response in that context, but also when we do the celebration of their lives and that they may say something that I can just hone in on that one thing. And even though the whole world around them may be nothing but, again, when I was referring to the death of the child, the 16-year-old, several years ago, it was in my sitting and listening to the family and then remembering what his name was, that I can use that as his name was Sterling. And so I dealt with Sterling qualities and characteristics and so forth. Even for a 16-year-old, of course, the mother came back later and told me, that the reason why I named him Sterling, because I liked Sterling beer at the time that he was born. Which was also a good angle as well. But the thing is for me as a clergy, as their faith leader, is just to sit, to listen, and just to be there, not try to answer things and to give some great theological understanding. I would even, there's a phrase that oftentimes is used, particularly with our own community, well, we know that we love them, but God loved them best. And that doesn't always resonate well with people when they hear that, because in hearing that, what does that mean? And I don't really know what that means. I understand, I can get theological and all that, but it's not helpful at that moment. And my responsibility at that moment is try to be helpful, to sit, listen, let them work through their grief, make sure they don't do things that are going to be not only hurtful for them in that moment, but also try to help guide them through this process in a way that, and a pace and a direction that is helpful to them as they move forward.
Thank you.
Sometimes I'm consciously aware when I go to the hospital or when someone has died or there's been a tragedy that I sort of represent the religious tradition that has failed them. And I'm guessing, as caretakers, many of you also somehow end up in that role, like society or medicine or whatever it is has failed them. And I do agree wholeheartedly, being present is a very powerful thing, just to be present, even if you're absorbing anger or frustration or pain. I don't know or remember the theologian, maybe these smarter folks will than I, who said, a lot of people think that we are these physical beings trying to live a spiritual life. But we believe, I can't speak for them, that we are in fact spiritual beings currently right now existing in a physical life. And one of the powers, I believe, of ritual is that it tells us what to do when we don't know what to do. And so it's not hard. Google Jewish rituals around death. And then you'll know. It's really, so when people don't know what to do, we say do this and then do this. And sometimes there's such power in just doing that. And then later, us rabbis and other spiritual leaders put significance on what those rituals are, but they mean different things to different people sometimes. You may have heard before, Judaism is a religion that encourages questions. We do not check our brains at the door. And therefore, I think it's okay to engage in dialogue with them when people are sick or their families and ask them important questions. Do you have a living will? Is there something like that on file? I would say, if it's possible, try to get a family member to discuss some sort of arrangements, or visitors who come to see the person. Sometimes there's kosher issues, people may be more observant of ritual Jewish law, sometimes other, but I think the important thing is to ask them questions about what it is that they may want, and to be present, and to recognize that the best thing sometimes is to say nothing or to just say, I'm sorry. Because, oh, you had her for 16 years. That doesn't work. Oh, she's in a better place. She's not here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think they've all spoken to the core of ministering to the dying, and the only thing I really can add is that you don't have to believe the spirit is separate from the body to find presence and comfort in many of these practices. People ask me, I have many people in my congregation that believe that the human spirit is part of the human body. They treasure the human body. For me to see an autopsy is a sacred experience where I have stood in awe and wonder of the human body. And so death is a part of what the human body does. So being present to people who believe that they're going to be recycled into this great universe of energy and matter. What's interesting is that they are no more or less fearful than anyone else facing death, which has been an important lesson to me over the years. They want the same things everybody wants. They want us to be together, living out what it means to be loving and interdependent, being present to the pain, to the fear, to the need for being reconnected if they have lost connection to loved ones, to the need to have loved ones around them when they die. So, of course, as they said, some people like to they say goodbye to all their loved ones and they want to die in quiet and alone. But respecting all of those needs and knowing that you yourself are doing holy work by being present to people in that full spectrum of life. One of the things that I have found, and quite honestly I've learned this from people in my church who are Buddhist, is that pain and suffering are not the same thing. And that you can sit with people in pain and help them understand that they don't have to suffer. And I do believe that that is what we mean sometimes when we say about we're in a healing place even as we die. Because if you can just live with the pain, which is a very physical thing, and not grip onto it and hold on to it. You even notice sometimes when you're tense around pain and then it makes it worse and you don't let it go, that creates suffering. And that happens with grief too. Grief is awful. It's painful, and if it's somebody you're very close to, you're going to feel it in many ways the rest of your life. But you don't have to grip on. You can just understand understand that we are human together. But that requires people to be there, to comfort you, to hold you, to just be present to you, to not be afraid of your fear. And that means every one of you who visits people who are afraid of death, to learn to be present to that. Learn to deal with your own fear of death. So there's this whole practice that I believe is very holy, no matter what you believe.
Thank you very much. Our panelists have talked about their role as a spiritual or religious leader, but let's talk about the role of the congregation. How do you guide the congregation to deal with a member's illness or impending death?
Well, just to build on what I was just saying, in our congregation, of course, we have things organized. We train people to be pastoral visitors. They're trained mostly to listen, to be there for people, fully present through difficult, painful times. But it's that visiting, that the being present, that they understand that they're the heart of the universe, that they represent that. They represent a whole community that is holding that person, and probably something larger as well. We have a caring committee that, does what many of your congregations do, which is, does a family need food? Does somebody need rides to the doctors? I was saying that on our pastoral care team, this I never would have imagined. One of our persons who was training, and I supervise them, has a trained care dog. And that caring dog has become one of the greatest members of our pastoral care team. It truly lives compassion with many people who do not accept compassion from anyone else. And it has changed my idea about who can be living out that love. So the whole community knows that even if they're not on a committee, that they are the hands and the feet and the heart of love, and that they can reach out in that day-to-day support when someone is very ill. Oftentimes, we have a big music program. Oftentimes, people will, from the choirs, will join together and do small groups and go to hospice or go to someone's home when they're dying and sing their favorite songs, or one person will go in and do that. We found that people, when they are dying, even when we think there's nothing else we can do, holding them in song has been very helpful to them.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go story real quick if I can. It's a story from the Talmud. It's about a Rabbi Yitzhak who was walking and runs into one of his teachers. He says, "Shalom Aleichem, may peace be upon you." And the teacher says, "Oh, how are you? How is your family?" And he said, "I'm well. My family is well." And he says, "Oh, how is Rabbi Yaakov?" And Rabbi Yitzhak says, "Oh, I haven't seen Rabbi Yaakov in some time. I don't know." And his teacher, Rabbi Yitzhak, says, "Oy vey," he says, "how can you not know? You pray to the same God, you study the same text, you eat the same food, you're a member of his community, you should know." And he sort of realized that he had sinned. So we do our best to stay a tight-knit community, and like lots of other communities, we try to be organized with a soup and solace community, committee that helps make meals or bring food not just to the person who is sick and to their families as well. We encourage, visits, clergy, other people will go to look in on people who are ill. We stream our services on demand even. And include beautiful music and prayers for healing so that someone who may be hospital-bound or homebound can still try to be a part of that community. We have a prayer called Misha Berak, may the one who is blessed. And in that form of addressing a higher power, bring that blessing of healing to all people who are ill. And then I like to add that I had a teacher, Rabbi Larry Kushner, and he said, there's certain kinds of prayers that God answers. We cannot pray to God to make our lives free of problems. That doesn't happen. We can't ask the Divine Spirit to make those of us who are sick or even that we love immune to disease. God doesn't exactly always seem to do that either. But we can ask God to give us strength and courage, to concentrate on what we have instead of what we might have lost. And people who do these things sometimes do find their prayers answered because they discover that they have more strength and courage than they ever thought that they had. And I ask them sometimes, where did you get it? I would like to think that somehow their prayers help them find or tap into a hidden reserve of faith and courage that weren't really available to them before. What do I live for? Asks a widow now that my husband has died. And yet, she finds reasons to get up every morning and revel in other family and grandchildren or other things. Rabbi, I'm too old, I'm too tired to start over again, says a congregant who lost their job. But somehow they find themselves getting up every morning and looking for another job. And it's true of divorce, and it's true of all sorts of places where people have to start over. I don't know always where they get that strength or where they get that hope. Because they don't always have it when they're speaking to me and they're sitting in my office. But I'd like to believe that they perceive that those things from the context of a concerned community, people who would have, in our community of Congregation Micah or other places, who made it clear to them that they cared, and maybe also from the knowledge that there is this Ruach Elohim, this actual Spirit of God, that is at the bedside of all people who are afflicted and downcast. And when we know that someone is terminal, our community reaches out. We don't pretend like it's not happening. We're Jewish. We'll talk about it. That's what we're doing.
Among the things that we seek to do is to extend the boundaries of this specific community. And even though we may have a specific geographical location, we know that there are those persons who are sick and shut in, those persons who perhaps are even terminally ill, who are not able to physically come to our place. So what we do in those contexts is to send them similar communiques of what we're doing in our own churches, i.e. We'll make sure that every week that they get a copy of the worship service as a CD. We'll send them our church newsletter. We will do other things to make sure that they know and understand they're still a part of the community, even though physically they may not be there. We still go and share community with them. We do it within our own church on the first Sundays, but we physically go and to share and make sure that happens. And oftentimes, if we miss someone or whatever the case may be, they'll call the church saying, that their deacon or their representative did not come out there to share. So we try to make sure that we're extending the boundaries of that. Several other things we do, not as much, there are some formal things we do, but the informal things are the things that have great impact, where people will send cards, they'll offer prayers, they will, sometimes go and sit with the sick person so that the other persons can go and do some other things in terms of life and living. Sometimes it needs to go just take the person who's the caregiver, and oftentimes we discover that caregivers are more burdened down than the person who's sick. And so we've got to do things to care for the caregiver, and so that he or she can do what he or she needs to do to try to regroup. Sometimes we just have to take on the role of the other responsibilities because the person doesn't want to leave the side of their loved one. And so we have to go and make sure that things around the house are taken care of, making sure that bills and other things are taken care of. Just making sure that things don't fall through the cracks, even when there are persons who are ill. So we're trying to just to fill those voids that happen when there is these extended illnesses as well as when death comes.
Thank you.
So this is probably the most difficult question for me to answer. I was ordained a priest in 1995. In my first 4 years, I was an assistant pastor in Beaumont, Texas, which was the extent of my congregation experience. I've been institutionalized for the last 19 years in one way, shape, or form. So I don't have a congregation as such. However, both from that perspective, but I'd like to, from a hospital chaplain's perspective, one of the things we do is, first of all, we try to serve as liaisons with the local church communities. So it's very important for us to have people who know that, you know, we're at the hospital, and so they're very free and very open in contacting us and letting us know, because even with hospital census and those things, there are people who, you know, slip through the cracks. So very important for the local congregations to know that we're there, and they have access to us, and we will respond. Keeping in touch with local clergy, not only from our own perspective, religious traditions, but all those who are open, and we try to do that in the pastoral care department to make sure that we keep those lines of communication open. I'll also say, from my perspective, part of, quote unquote, my congregation is the hospital staff. And they too are experiencing grief, and they too are experiencing suffering as they deal with the sickness and the pain of their patients. So we provide a lot of support for them, because they are as committed to the sick and the dying that they're serving, and many times they stand in the role of family members for patients who don't have anyone. It's amazing to see the response of our nurses and our staff when someone is actively dying and there are no family members, and how important it is for them to contact us, to let us know that this is going on, but the time that they will spend on their own when they know someone is in this phase of transition. So the support that we give to them as they care for patients and their families, I think that's another role in which, as a community, we pray. Of course, in our tradition, you know, prayers for the sick, prayers for the dying. In our tradition, prayers after death for both family and the deceased are all very important. November is a big month for us in that direction, and people do find a lot of support for that. So I think what we all kind of share is, you know, none of us, we're not islands. We are interconnected with each other, and we bring the strength of those traditions when we're at our best. Just as you said, like to sort of fill in the gaps that we can, because there's so much we recognize that we can't do. So at least let's provide the support that we can.
Thank you. This is going to be the final question for audience questions, but I'm going to have to ask you to be brief on this, and I feel terrible about it. But let's talk about the afterlife. What is your faith's view on the afterlife?
So, do this quick. The traditional way in which we describe it, the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, hell. All right. Now, that's a simple way, because all four of them are experienced and understood and theologically reflected on in a variety of different ways. But I think life for us is linear. It's a journey through history into eternity, and that at the end of it, we believe that there will be a radical encounter with the living God who brought us into existence, who created us to experience that mystery in its fullness. It will include some form of accountability of who we are, how we have lived, how we have related to each other, that the legacy that we've left behind is something, yes, we will present before us, take with us, but within the context of an infinite love and mercy that has the capacity to overcome all of our human frailty, all of our human weakness, if we are open to receive it.
Thank you.
We believe that there is life after this life, and that, and I'm speaking initially in terms of its theological understanding, but in terms of where we traditionally believe, and that is that death in and of itself is a transition for us, and in that transition we move from this life that is temporal and with all of its own sets of challenges and illnesses and problems to a life that eternal nature and one that does not have so many things that are associated with this life. I say that in terms of its own theological and traditional way, but then I go on to remember something my father said in 1984 when he was dying. I was sitting by his bedside and asked him a question. My father had pastored for 33 years here in Nashville, done a lot of other things, and was very well noted, very well respected in terms of his whole pastoral experience and his theological perspectives. But I asked him the question, what was he thinking at the points when he was dying? He was on his deathbed at the hospital, and he said that he's thinking about what's going to happen after death, and he said that he had a fear of not so much a fear, but an apprehension of the unknown. Because, even as we want to give, and we can go to biblical passages and talk about things that may speak from those frameworks, but within our own souls, we really don't know what to expect on that other side. And that's the difficulty of all of it. I must also say that once my father passed away, I became less afraid of death, because I realized that, as he has gone through, that I too, at some point, hopefully not anytime soon, it's kind of like the phrase that says, well, I'm ready, just don't want to be on the next bus. But I became less afraid, less apprehensive of whatever it may be on the other side.
Thank you.
Rabbi David Wolpe tells this story. He says 2 twins are in a womb and a gestational sac, and then the birth process starts to happen, and one of the babies is born. And what's happening on the other side? They're popping champagne and they're smoking cigars and they're celebrating, but what's the other twin thinking? We don't know. We believe this potentially to be a gestational world, and that there is something after it. The Jewish tradition is humble enough to know that it doesn't know what happens afterwards. Unlike many of my esteemed colleagues, we do not believe anyone has died and come back to life. But we do put a great deal of emphasis on what we say, l'chaim, to life. And there is in fact a text in the Talmud that says, you will be held accountable for all of the pleasures in this world you were permitted to partake of and surpassed on. Which is to say, we put great emphasis on this life. We do believe in some accountability, but there's a humility that we just don't know what happens after.
Thank you.
So people in my congregation in Unitarian Universalism believe everything from reincarnation to heaven to nothing. And I often say the only thing we agree upon is that we don't know what happens after we die, except then somebody will raise their hand and says, well, I remember my past lives. So I will say we do not agree on anything. So yes, our focus is that you can get your heaven and hell on earth, and a lot of people really focus on their legacy on this earth.
Thank you. We have time for a few questions. Care to raise your hand and ask a question, whether to the whole panel or a particular panelist? Any questions from the audience? Very compelling things about looking at death, dying, about your own experience.
We can keep talking too. We got
Yeah, I do have a question. I'm a preacher's kid, so I'll reveal this. I grew up with church, and we talk a lot about the issue of dealing with pain. We often hear people say that they want to fix something, they want to fix a problem there. And I read this passage recently talking about being the darkness with people sometimes. Sometimes you need to be in that. Could you talk a little bit about what that means to you? Because that could put you in a very vulnerable position where, how do you get out of it after that?
So when I'm helping supervise the lay people in my church, that's the hardest thing for them to realize, is that our job is not to fix things. Now there's people out here who are medical people, for instance, and there's many parts in our life where fixing things are great. So it really is great practice to learn to just be with, whether, how many of us are totally present to joy as well? It's the joy and the sorrow. It's a practice. And so when people here were talking about the great transition, however we imagine that. It is a transition. And there's a wonderful Buddhist saying, which is, the practitioner goes and says to their Buddhist priest, I think I've got it all except the transitions. I've got the practice. And the Buddhist priest says, it's all transitions. So this is a wonderful opportunity to sit with people and learn to face your own transitions.
Thank you. So one of the things that I find is, in our tradition, paradox is absolutely central. And there's always, you have to distinguish between paradox and contradictions. I mean, contradictions, at least for us, they don't exist. They can't be and not be equal and at the same time. But paradoxes appear to be contradictions. And in our tradition, there's so many paradoxes of where that is. In weakness, I find strength. Or in dying, that I live. In giving, that I receive. So in this context, I think when we try to help people to realize that they have been living in these paradoxes, sometimes rotely, sometimes more intently, then we can help them find it. And for some people, there's certain passages that might help to, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, little passages that might, that it is all right to be broken, it is all right to be not in control, and it is all right not to have this fixed, because like those other paradoxes, this is a path that we can ultimately, it's easy to follow because you can't do anything about it. So maybe we can just sort of, let's live in it.
Thank you.
Part of what I desire to do, not always effective, not always successful, is to bring closure, not fixture. Fixing, not always able to fix things. I oftentimes say, for my own benefit, that I'm hoping, I mentioned it this past week, not even thinking about this panel, that I hope I at least have 30 days before I die to know that I'm about to die, so I can fix a lot of stuff that I probably need to go and fix today. But the thing that I desire to do is to help them to bring closure, to close things, if there's an opportunity. The challenge is sometimes when there's a sudden death, a sudden situation you can't fix or close, and that leaves so many open wounds, and those are the ones that are very difficult to do. But let's say that there are persons, and I've had this situation where people have unresolved issues with people, or they have unresolved other things that are happening in terms of their life and living. And that, I began trying to think, what can I do? What can I say? How can I help them to at least bring closure? They may not even get it resolved, but they can bring closure in their own mind so that as they head toward their own death, that they can die in peace.
Thank you. Flip, would you like to answer?
Yeah, 30 days would be great. I was thinking the Jewish tradition says, repent one day before you die.
That's right.
You're supposed to know when that is. I also believe that the universe sort of operates independent of our control, that we're not in charge. And I believe that because life teaches me, despite our wishes we're born, despite our wishes we get sick, and despite our wishes we die. And amazing things happen to us that we often did not deserve, and dreadful things happen even though we've done nothing wrong. And one of the powers, I think, of religion is that with all the progress we've made through science and scholarship, we've never deciphered and really dealt with some of these more ultimate questions. I like Judaism's answers to some of these questions, like how are we supposed to live and how are we supposed to die, largely because they reflect a belief in God, who's not meant there to scare us, but to comfort us. And so I think we try to be as comforting as we can and to not take things personally. Because every once in a while, I'll be the victim, I hate to use that word, of someone's rage or their fear or whatever they're trying to put on me. And then I have this moment when I go, oh, it's not me. They're mad at other things. And to be able to absorb that and to figure out how to get that toxicity out of me so I don't bring it home to my family or to transfer it to other people is very hard. And I imagine many of you who are caretakers are often in that situation. And there's no one right tool. You got to figure out, and sometimes you find a tool and then it doesn't work forever. So maybe you need to go for a walk before you get home. Or maybe you need to, I don't know, do something so that you recognize the power you're bringing to healing and recognize that it's not always going to work and that it's not your fault.
Thank you, and we are at the conclusion, but we still have enough time for some concluding thoughts, and I'd love to ask each of you to give a pearl of wisdom to the audience here about how do you start a conversation on this topic with someone who's not in this room, and who might not even think about being in this room at this moment. Why don't we start with Father and then come down the way?
You know, how to win friends and influence people. Nice to meet you. When's the last time you thought about that? Well, I'll take a cue from this panel, how we started. I think if we start talking about life, I don't mean in an abstract way, I think when we engage people, we try to find common ground. And in the context of talking about the positive things or the things we celebrate or the things that are going on in a person's life, I think the more important thing, if for some reason we have a reason to get to this conversation that's meaningful to them and not simply my desire to just, that's what I like to talk about, it is that if that opportunity arises in that conversation, I think it's always best to begin, well, what do you think about it? How do you feel about this? What is this? What has been your experience of this? And if there's a desire to continue that conversation, then in the dialogue, we can talk, we can share our own experiences, regardless of where we're coming from, and maybe in the process of that conversation, we both can come to a deep insight of this great topic that we've been talking about.
Thank you.
As a pastor of the congregation, what I've done is to have a general conversation with everyone about some very basic things that need to happen. Among them, get a will. Doesn't make a difference if you have 2 dimes or 2 billion dimes. And that you still need to get a will and so that get a will, do the 5 wishes. We've done the 5 wishes within our congregation. And do those things so that you don't transfer these burdens onto your family. And so we try to have that as a part of our conversation so that you know, because many people respond, interested enough, they'll respond more to not wanting to put the burdens on their family than they would on trying to make sure they're doing something that's spiritually or theologically correct. And so that, you know, I have conversations with people almost every week. Get this done. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate on it. Because, you know, otherwise, not only is it a burden on them, but so many family conflicts happen after a person dies. And those are very ugly fights. I mean, I'm dealing with 2 or 3 even right now. Not me personally, but helping people to sort out stuff. And if you don't take care of it now, then you shift that burden to them. You're going to create less peace and less harmony among those that you leave behind because of that.
Thank you.
I just did a funeral not long ago with a Holocaust survivor, and he left a note, and it said, "Don't fight over my stuff." I have no idea what you're talking about, David. People talk to me about death all of the time. I think sometimes just the religious presence in death makes people think about other religious more, and so you just got to put a few feelers out there, and then boom. Very often it's children who are very scattered and very direct, and often it's parents with their children who actually have very adult questions but are asking them through their kids because their kids have brought it up first. And with kids, sometimes a very straightforward approach can be very helpful. A kid came recently because his grandfather had died and the mother was in the room. He was afraid his mom or he could die. I don't know, I don't have the rule book. I just said, well, that's not going to happen for a long time. And he seemed very satiated by that. I have no proof that that's the right thing. But sometimes these conversations are real helpful in community. You have things like this, you start putting it out there, and then people will come out of the woodwork because they have the permission to discuss it.
Thank you.
All of what they said. The only thing I want to add is that we really do want control, and you can use that to your benefit. Because if they do know they're going to die, whether they are actually facing reality or they're ill, helping them do all of that kind of planning. We recently had a member die who was a nurse. She was very realistic. I've got this diagnosis, I'm going to die. And she died in less than a month. And she just went to it. She was very clear about, 5 wishes, living well. I have people that have gone to the hospital and pinned their living will on their chest. And it's huge in our congregation when they found out that if you call 911, they are going to revive you, whether you have that pinned on your chest or not. So we do encourage people to talk to their loved ones and let them know everything they want. We have a big file cabinet full of people's wishes for their memorial services. So use that urge to control things to your benefit.
Well, thank you very much, and let's give the panel here a round of applause.